It's Friday. All right. I figured since everybody's home, I'd do a impromptu bonsai show. Got nothing else to do, so here we go. And if you're tired of my prattling, just turn the volume off and enjoy the trees. All right, here we go. Trident maple right here, about 15, 16 years old. And you see the black metal pipe on there. I am repositioning and setting that lower branch on the left as I view it. The tree is, I call it a triple trunk. There's a short chunk that obviously extended up much higher, but I cut it down to almost 3/4 of the way of the trunk on the left side. So, but it kind of presents as a double trunk. And of course, there's more ramification coming on. This just leafed out in the last week or so. And so I'm letting certain branches extend, and then I'll be cutting this back for the ramification. But I'm liking this tree more and more every year. It's getting better and better. We're going to swing around here as we go. And here we have a narrow leaf ficus. It's just beginning to start to swell, and perhaps you can see a leaf or two right there. Let me get it behind that. Okay, so it's starting to come out again for its spring growth, and of course it has to be trimmed and worked on. I may even go in and clear the root system out some, and of course a lot of those can be started into new plants, the root cuttings, and whatever pieces that come off of the upper area can be started too. This in fact is my only narrow leaf ficus. I got this out of an auction from the Bonsai Club that I attend, and it was one of the members, and that's that. And there's my prehistoric elm grove with old Bronto there. It's just a compilation of cuttings that I had started, and I figured, well, I'll just throw this on here and hedge trim it for a few years and see what happens. So, and this has been in leaf now probably a week and a half, and it's starting to get to the place where the new growth is hardening off enough that I can cut it back. And here I'm working on that root over rock ficus right there. And as you can see, there's plenty of stuff around here. That's a eastern red cedar tanuki that I just put together. We had Hurricane Maria to come through a while back, and I got through it in the last hour. A branch or two broke off of that cedar tree right there, and so I took some of the branches and made me a Hurricane Maria collection. And this is a Procumbians nana tanuki. So that's been on there for probably a year and a half now. The plant itself, I've had it for quite a number of years. The wood was a juniper that was collected for a bonsai demonstration, and obviously it failed. So I took the wood after the plant had expired, and I made this and another. Well, actually, I made 3 tanukis out of the wood from that tree, and then I took one of them and donated it back to the club for a raffle or an auction that, you know. So I did all I could to try to save the juniper for them, but it was just dug out of season. It was transferred to a pot and then worked on all in the same day. So it's like, well, that's a hard one. But anyway, that's a Procumbens nana tanuki, and basically you can see that it's still in stitches, meaning it's wrapped up with my tape. It has wire on it to secure the plant to the wood, and I'm basically just letting it grow, and probably next year or the year after, and I'll have intermediate inspections of the wood and everything like that to make sure the wood is protected, and then just to see how it goes from, you know, year to year, make sure everything is okay. But other than that, I'm not going to work on it. A red bougainvillea is starting to leaf out. In my area, it's kind of tough to keep a bougainvillea. It gets cold enough that you could lose your plant. And I'm not really, even though I've done the greenhouse thing, I'm not really a greenhouse loving person. I've got so much to do. It's really hard, so I'll heat my little greenhouse a little bit, and hopefully things will survive, but it's really tough in this area. And a trident maple, and this was my rooted cutting years ago. I call it my chicken butt. Boom, right there. The heel that's on it was basically the base of it, and it didn't set out roots except, you know, on 3 sides of it, and this side didn't set out any roots, so that's why it kind of turned like that, and I love it. I'm glad it turned out the way it did. And again, I keep threatening and looking at cutting it down to a shohin about right there. But because it comes off of my logo tree, my Trident Prime as I call it, I tend not to mess with it too much, except general maintenance and upkeep. And that was just a juniper parsoni from a rooted cutting, and I've wired it and worked on it a little bit, and as time goes I'll do something else with it, and I really need to change the pot because of it being off balance. It falls over a lot. And here we have another Procumbens nana tanuki, and that's also on red cedar wood. And this is the main piece of the juniper wood from the Bonsai Club. And here we have a Procumbens nana on it as a tanuki. And so that is my image right there. And I need to work on the wood again as far as preservation goes. It's been probably 2 years now since I treated the wood, so it's doing pretty good. As a matter of fact, the base of it, anything that's touching the ground, I actually, once I lime sulfured it, cleaned it and all of that, I actually put on some truck bed liner. See that black right there? That's truck bed liner material, and so that helps against the moisture where it contacts the soil. And you can see here on that other tanuki right next to it, I'm trying to grow roots in through there a little higher up, where the wood, the tanuki wood, the dead wood, meets the live tree, and then I'll rework the base of it later. Probably I'll even stick a rock next to it. So that's what that looks like. And here we have the other side of that juniper, and that's kind of the viewing side right there. And this got potential to go on a rock as a cliff overhang. It can be an individual planting also, or it could be a major tree with some smaller ones around. And this is the other side of that trident maple. So that's the way it looks down at the base. That's the important part right there. And here we have the back side, or the other side of that bougainvillea. It's a red one. And I'm considering taking this out of the pot and just planting it in a real large pot and just letting it grow a little bit. Take some cuttings, of course, and work with that. And this is the other side of that Procumbens nana tanuki. So again, like I said, I'm just having a little ad hoc bonsai show, and this is my accent, if you will. Mother-in-law's tongue, snake plant, whatever you want to call it, and the pink sarissa. That's really nice. And the margin of the sarissa is variegated, which is different. I've got another pink sarissa back there, which is a single flower plant, and the leaves are more elongated than this sarissa, which it makes a really nice plant, and it's different from the other sarissas, even my white sarissas. So, and this is the other side of that 3-trunk trident maple. And like I said, year over year, I'm loving this more and more. So here we go, and we'll see this little root over rock juniper, Procumbens nana, and on the right side of that, as we're viewing it, that's sphagnum moss from the base of the plant at the crown of the rock all the way down to the ground. I'm hoping that all of the roots have finally completely gone into the pot. I assessed it earlier this year, and there were new roots coming out in January, February time frame. I noticed new roots growing last year after a period of time. So I'm hoping that when I go in here, probably April, June sometime, and start picking at the sphagnum moss, that I'll find roots all the way to the base of that. And then I'll start removing the sphagnum from the top down slowly until, you know, I'm satisfied, basically. If I see good, strong roots, I'll go faster. If I see poor root development, I'll go slower. But eventually, the roots should be exposed all the way down. And I tried to make a path with soil once it comes down before the pot, where the vertical rock meets that horizontal one. I put soil through there and covered it with the sphagnum also. Hopefully the roots will follow that path also. And once that's completed, then I will consider developing roots on this side of the rock. Whether I take another juniper and fuse it to that and fake it until I make it, then hey, it works for me. There's so many trees, so many plants, so we'll just try to go around in this circle right here. And this is my impromptu bonsai show. So welcome to the show. If you just started with us, you could always rewind the deal. If you're tired of me talking, hit the mute button, but don't turn it off, because I don't want you to miss any of these wonderful looking trees. And this is one of my latest creations. And I just still have to say that even on the video, it does not do these plants the justice that they need in viewing them. They look a lot better in person than they do on video, because you can't really assess the twists and turns in the trunk. And the thing is, they're still alive after I did all of that to them. Wow! And in those little bitty pots, I've given plants to people, and I knew they didn't have a clue. And they said, is it going to live in that little pot? Some people say, after I asked them about their plants, they say, oh yeah, I took it out of that little pot and put it in a bigger pot. They're wonderful. That's just so wonderful. Yeah. But anyway, and there's my little root over deadwood, if you will. It's not really a tanuki in a certain sense. I just kind of put it over like it was a rock. And I've got good roots developing right in line with the trunk, as you can see it coming across that, the brighter part of the deadwood from right to left, which is toward the roots. And then the roots come right to in the area where that rock is. So, well, actually that's tape. But hey, that was just a cutting that I had, and I had that piece of wood, and it's like, well, what am I going to do with it? I put it on there, and late last year I wired this tree to put some movement in it. My first thing was just to put it on the wood, let it sit for a little while, and let it grow or live or die, and then I would put the work into it, because it was basically a nothing tree, just a cutting. And if it wasn't going to work, then I wasn't going to put the wiring work into it and the pinching and all of that. So far it's still living. And here we have a common juniper. And like I said in another video, this juniper was sold as I was growing up as a sergeant juniper, and still common juniper, but it's pretty good. And the rock itself is basically an accent. It's not a root over rock configuration. I have the rock secured to the base of the trunk so that it doesn't shift or whatever, and then of course I hid my sins with some of the moss in most of the case. And as the tree develops, hopefully we'll get some girth on the trunk, and then I can do a little bit more about hiding the attachment. So, and here we have more, and I hope you can see that, because I've got the two plants I tried to stagger them, but anyway, the green background makes it a little difficult on seeing this plant in the foreground. But that's a root over rock, another one of the juniper communis, formerly Sergeant juniper. No one has a name for it, and so it's just like a common juniper. And at this point, on these three junipers in the foreground, well, actually this and the one in the back, I'm just going to let it grow for a while, and then I'll go back either next year or the year after, letting it grow kind of wild, and then I'll trim and cut back. The reason for me doing that is to increase the girth on the secondary and the tertiary branching, you know, primarily on the secondary. I mean, my primary branches, they're okay for the size of the plant, so I'm pretty happy with most of those, but the tertiary needs to develop, and so then I'll get back in with real fine wire and get those pads developed. And that is a Parsonii juniper in the back there, and it's a root over rock. I've got it covered up with the clear plastic, but I put the black plastic on it to keep the mold, mildew, fungus from growing in there. And it's still looking pretty healthy, pretty steady after several weeks of development. And we're turning now. And this is a trident maple, root over rock. And this plant is actually a seedling that I developed from one of my plants that I pulled from the ground in front of or underneath the parent tree. So seeds fell on the ground. So many seedlings came up in the grass, and I think that year I got about 100 seedlings out of the ground, which, again, this is one of them. And earlier this year, I opened up the cover over the roots and cleaned everything out, assessed the root system, and this one is coming along pretty good. Probably next year I'll take the wrap off and just let it grow in the open, and as I water it, as it rains on it and the environment takes effect, it'll wash the roots away, or the soil away from the roots, and then we'll go from there. But if I need to take it down and reassess it, reset the roots, then I'll do that. And on this, I'm kind of, the way I'm saying that I'll just let the soil wash away. The soil was placed on top of the roots. There was no soil on the rock underneath the roots, and then, you know, grown that way. Depending on what time of year that I'm growing a plant, you know, how large the plant is also, you know, how hot it is, how cold it is. I'll put soil on the rock or not. If it's cooler, you know, I'll just moisten the rock, lay my roots on it, you know, put soil on top of that, and there you go. You know, but if it's, you know, if it's kind of hot or whatever, you know, then I take a different tact, you know. So it depends on the year and what's going on with the plant, the root system, on how I deal with putting the roots over the rocks. And of course, the trident right there is a little bit different from the elm. If I were to put an elm on, you know, I just pretty much go with the elms. Those things have so much moisture in it. Even though the trident roots have a bit more moisture than, you know, your typical or average tree, which means you have to be more careful in the wintertime when things get cool. You don't want it standing in water, you know, or, you know, sometimes you have to protect the root system because there's so much moisture in the roots themselves. And this elm, of course, no, I'm not proud of my weeds in the pot. It's just spring and everything is starting to spring out. So, and again, this tree has been wired in the upper branches. It's been cut back, cut down, regrown. Upper branches that were heavy were stubbed out. Lots of cuttings taken from this tree and others like it, but it's doing pretty good. It's doing pretty good. So in these next few weeks, we'll be, and you can see how the trunk is flaking right there. I like that. Yep. And the next few weeks we'll be going in and trimming branches and wiring as we need to. So we're still moving, and here we go. Hopefully we can see that. That's the bottle brush tree. And I don't see any flower heads developing yet, but we have growth shoots. And of course, the trunk for me is the major feature here. The deep fissures and the basically mold and dirt gets on the trunk, and it's collected very easily because of the roughness of the bark. If you clean your bottle brush tree, be very careful with that bark. It's not as hard as it may look, okay? And so you'll end up smoothing out your trunk, and you'll lose the fissures in it. But again, if you choose to get rid of that, you can just take a toothbrush. Most medium to hard bristle toothbrush will clean that up nicely with water, you know, and of course if you want to use a little fungicide around it, that's okay too. If you even a water hose with one of the jet nozzles will diminish the fissures in that bark substantially. So you have to be careful if you want to keep the fissures on the bark on your bottle brush trees. But periodically you should wash them, you know, to get some of the soot off, the mold, the mildew, the fungus, and it'll make it look a lot nicer, plus it's healthier. And here we have a little rooted cutting that was wired also, and it's developing pretty nicely for just a little piece of a cutting of that bottle brush tree. So you can see some of the shoots right there developing, and they're growing upward. Well, I'll let them grow come June, July, August sometimes. They should be long enough. I'll wire them down in position. So why not wire them down now? Because I want them to get the energy and the strength. It'll slow down the rest of the growth here. These can catch up a little bit more. I can come down here later on, cut back this, get more branching, and then I'll go from there. So there's a madness to my method, but my method and my madness, I understand. And that's just a little cutting of a Chinese plum. That was a little crescent pot that I had made just for something like this. It wasn't really intended on being a whole pot, but just to put onto a flat piece of rock or some other thing, just to give some kind of feature to the design of the plant. And so again, very few of these plants have been trimmed or worked on. I mean, you know, I see them every day, so I'm assessing what they need or whatever. A bougainvillea, I started this from a cutting. It fell over in that pot one year. A storm came through, blew it over. It fell over like that, so I left it. I'm not working any more than I have to. No. I figured, well, but Cascade, it'll work, or something different. So I've actually got a couple of choices here. I can cut this off where that first branch turns vertical and comes back. I can cut everything to the left of it off and just use that as a single planting that way. And of course all that stuff will be rooted. I mean, it could be air layered, but they root pretty easily, especially if it's warm. Or I could just leave that little small branch in the back for a back branch, use the lower branch here to the left and down, and then get rid of that right where the thick part comes out at that bifurcation there between what goes down and what goes up. Then just cut all of that off right there and root that somewhere else. And of course I'd leave a little stub there, because if that took off and back butted, that would even be nicer on that cascade. So there are options, and again, I'm just growing this right now in that flower pot, and that was a cut flower vase that was for commercial use in a store. So I use these, I drill holes in them on the side toward the bottom and on the very bottom. And when I want to really create a root over rock situation, and which means when I want to create long, good roots, I'll put them in this type of situation, and then I water them from the bottom, and that way I can get all the roots I want. I do my forsythia that way, the Chinese elms, and obviously the bougainvillea. So I'll have options with that. And here's my fig tree. And for me as a bonsai, this fig tree is probably about 10 years old or so now. I started it from a cutting, and the major trunk is, that's a 12-inch pot, okay? So that major trunk there was pretty close to that size, you know, and I'm sure it's grown about no more than half an inch from what it originally was. You know, so for me, figs are relatively easy to root. If you start early enough, when they're dormant, keep them moist. You know, I've had decent success rooting them straight in the ground. In my case, in a sandy situation, you know, not very much loam or other organic materials in there. And this is the master of the house. That's my big trident maple. I bought this tree in a bundle of 15 trees from Brussels Bonsai years and years ago, about 27, 28 years. I basically just called it a 30-year-old tree because, you know, the seedlings were already 2 or 3 years old. And so this was the last of the bundle of 15, and it was the ugliest tree in the bundle, and I didn't want to work with it, so I stuck it in the ground for a little while, and I dug it and moved it and cut it back, and I would probably every other year I would dig it up and rotate it around in the ground so it would get the sun on every side, you know. And on the years that I didn't plan on digging it up, I would go in and undercut the roots, and I would do it by section, either half the root mass from, you know, midsection of the tree, or I do it in quarters, depending on what year I was going to dig it up. I mean, it wasn't a hard, fast schedule, but, you know, that's kind of the way I treated it. So some years I would undercut the roots in quarters around the circle. Some years it would be half of it, and then some years I would actually dig the entire tree up, reset it, and then go on from there. So that's pretty much it. While I was looking at that tree, and I'll say it again, The tree there in the ground is a cutting from that tree. The big tree in the ground there with all of the air layer pots on it was a cutting from this tree. And hey, it's been there, and that's where I get my seeds. And it works for me. Another elm tree. And I believe I actually collected this years and years ago from an overflow containment area where I used to work. And it's like, okay, it's been with me all this time. And so I've taken lots of cuttings, and it's been pretty good. And I just made this design on this tree last year. It was much taller. It had twin trunks. You can see where the black part is there. I cut that out. And that apex right there, I let extend and grow. But there was two trunks there. The tree was more in a vertical position at the time. And it's like, well, let me get drastic with it. So I whacked off the branch on the right, or the trunk on the right, changed the angle in the pot. Yeah, it was in a growing pot at the time. You know, I wasn't trying to bonsai it. I was just growing it and seeing what was available. And so this is what came out. And I really liked this tree. And of course, like I said, everything has to be trimmed up and cut back. You can see the new growth. It's coming along pretty good, but it isn't hardened off yet on the secondary branches, so I'm not going to bother with it just yet. And I'll cut it back hard and go from there. Little accent plant. When I take cuttings, you know, I'll break off a branch of a juniper or whatever plant, stick it into a pot next to something, stick it in the ground, and go on about my business. Well, I pulled this up last year and stuck it in that little soup bowl or cereal bowl, and it's growing like gangbusters, believe it or not. You can see the new growth developing there for the spring. I actually put wire on this, and there's soil underneath it, but I had some tan sand in my hand, so I put that on top of it. That actually helps hold the soil together because it dries out and kind of cakes up. Here we got another pink sarissa, and I'm growing this for the future. I've got it staked, wired up right, and it's flowering out really nicely. Yep, so that's a pink sarissa. And we're walking. And fringe plant, loropetalum. And it's in a nice flower arrangement right now. It's been flowering on and off since January, February time frame. So it's doing pretty good. It isn't much of a plant, but it's pretty as far as the show goes. And got a little Japanese black pine right here. And I'm kind of just letting it grow wild right now, but you can see the basic structure is there. And again, when I get to my spring cleaning, I've got to get in here and pull that moss back. And some of this I'll take plant it somewhere and let it grow so I can have a supply of moss. There was a time I wouldn't touch that stuff. It's like, ooh, what is that? It's got cooties in it. I pretty much all but eat it now. And that is a pomegranate. This I call my summer pomegranate. My neighbor was getting rid of it, and they said, hey, do you want it? I said, yeah. Can you wait till the winter? We'd rather not. I said, okay, I'll get it. It was June, July, August. I forget which, but it was in the hot part of the summer. And so I went down there with my axe and chopped the roots back and my Sawzall and cut it out at the base, drug it down here. I took between my axe and my Sawzall, I just hacked on it and whacked it into like 3 or 4 pieces, and this being the major trunk of it, which I hacked it and try to protect this part. And then I've gone in here and cleaned that dead wood, and I took my flamethrower and burned the wood and lime sulfured it also, and then I put a protective coating on it. You know, you can buy the wood restorer. It's a glue, kind of like a Elmer's glue, white glue, that you're supposed to be able to put on rotted wood. I mean, nobody but me would try to save rotted wood in a house or something that's important with glue like that, okay? But it's good for this use, and this has been treated, and it's holding up pretty good, actually. Now I've got to go in and work on the base where it's really on the ground here, or the soil. But other than that, the rest of this is holding up pretty good. Now this I did cut back earlier, and I'll probably go in here again in the next few weeks once these shoots harden off a little bit, and do some more cutting back. But that's pretty good. It's nothing spectacular, but for what it is, it was free. I like it. And crepe myrtle. So for those who love crepe myrtles, here's a crepe myrtle for you. And that is a rooted cutting. It's not a tree, you know, that was started from a seed or a small cutting. It was pretty much that size when I took the cutting. And I've gone in with my chainsaw, routed out the gross stuff that was dead, and it actually gives more feature to the plant. So it's coming along pretty good, and the new growth is beginning to bud out in the upper branches here. So it's not a dead plant. It's alive. I've got a grapefruit tree right there. And so from the grapefruit tree, I get grapefruits. Not apples, not oranges, not peaches or plum, grapefruits. And then I get the seeds out of the grapefruits. Ah, I'm a genius. I finally got it right. And so I just pulled this up out of the ground. I was walking past this very area right here, and I found that rock on the ground. So, and I usually have black tape in my pocket. And so now this has been 2 months, 2.5 months that it's sat there. So it's alive. And of course, soup bowl, cereal bowl, breakfast bowl. There's a hole drilled in the bottom with a diamond tip drill bit for drilling glass, ceramics, and the like. Boom, Bob's your uncle. And we're walking. And this is a tanuki that I'm working on. And it is that Juniperus communis, or Sergeant Juniper. And I'll take and carve on that wood at some point. Take out whatever's become punky. I pinched this back probably 3 months ago, something like that, and I see new growth coming in. So I'll just work on that as it grows. And we're walking. And here we have a few junipers, Procumbians nanus, that I've actually wired in place. And quite frankly, I haven't worked on these little fellows in probably a year and a half, 2 years. But they're still surviving. And they give me insight. They give me thoughts and ideas. It lets me know what's going on, okay? And crab apple. A big box store crab apple. And I've been working on it for some time, you know, wiring, pulling branches up. And of course, just like anybody that grows or manages bonsai, you think about, well, what can I do to change it? What can I do to make it better? And I keep thinking, well, you could always air layer stuff out there just above those 2 lower branches, and work on it from that point. You know, make a smaller plant. But this is kind of original. So I've planted a few other trees around the property, and I think I'll get my shohin out of those little jewels. And we can see some more of the little junipers. That's a piece of a rock, and the trunk just extends up the side of that rock on the left side of it. And this was a piece of stone that I had. I stuck a juniper on it, a little square tray that I had made. And that's been there probably 3 or 4 years now. And that was a little juniper that I had given to someone, and an elderly person. And they became ill, and so they had to retire from work, and they gave it back to me. But anyway, so here we go. Let's take a look at this. This is a Zelkova, and it's sitting on a rock. And of course, it's just starting to leaf out. And hey, it's doing better than I thought it would. So that's pretty much it. And of course, I'm not very proud of my weeds, but it's a part of the feature. So anyway, until I get close to the planting that I'm happy with, and I want to upgrade it and make it even nicer, I use recycled bonsai soil, and so I'll have more weeds. So when I get this to where I'm happy with it or satisfied with it, I'll have the weeds, and then I'll put it in a better mix of bonsai soil, less organic stuff in it, So just like the rest of the plants, take a look at, let's see if we can see that new leaf growth. See how deep the fissure is in the leaves as compared to the alders. And the leaf is convex here on the new leaf, and then they're concave on the older leaves. So they kind of move around and take shape. And it makes you think, what kind of tree is this? But I like the way the leaves are really, really deeply fissured. And at this point, they're pretty pristine. We've had some good warm days, but not really hot, blistering days yet. And so everything still looks pretty new. And what have we here? Okay, a little elm, root over rock. And you might say, well, why didn't you put him on the other seat? He doesn't have a driver's license. And here we have an elm. Now this elm I got from an auction recently at my bonsai club. Not my bonsai club, but the club that I attend. So anyway, I think I better speed this up. We're coming on to an hour. And but that's a nice tree. It was an air layer. And this is one of my featured trees. I really like this tree. It's a root over rock trident maple. And it's got pink sarissa in here as a feature. And some driftwood, deadwood that I'm going to try to put a big juniper on, Procumbens nana. And this was also a tree that I pulled the seedling out of the ground from the tree in front. And one of my favorite trees that I've contrived over the years here. Trident maple. And another trident maple. And it was also one of the seedlings that I pulled out. And again, for a little bit I grew them in pots until they stabilized, and then I grew them in the ground some, and in some cases this little one here never touched the ground, and that is a fusion of two trees at any rate to create the root over rock in portion. That right there, I'm just, not only do I like this tree, I'm impressed that I made it. That I made it. Okay, now I'm going to have to do some follow-up work, because you can see there's a little gap. The soil settled where that root is on the rock on the left. So I'll have to go back in there. And you know how they have the home foundation repair places? I'll have to do like that on this. Jack it up. But anyway, I don't know if this view is, but that is, in my opinion, is very nice. And You know, so you get, with this tree, you get a view of something no matter what side you look at it from. And that's what I like when I create some of the trees. You know, no doubt if you do a pinjing versus uh, versus a bonsai, you've got more features to deal with because you've got other elements other than a tree that you can support your design on. So these are cuttings of jade plants in different stages. This, when it fills out again after its winter snap, that's a lovely plant right there. So, and there we have the mother plant, nice trunk, and that's about the only thing on as far as feature goes on this thing. And these are some twisted up cuttings. But so that you don't think that I only do trident maples, that's a pink sarissa twisted up, by the way. And I'll have long roots on that because I've got it in a deep pot. So I'll have options. I could either make it into a single planting, or I can stick it on a rock, you know, or something like that. And this one is a white sarissa, fully wired at this point, and it's going to have a nice exposed root. So, and of course, I'll be able to cut it back and not have such long growth out here if I want it. And the main feature would be the roots and something in here. But again, if you're going to put it on a rock or something like that, then you need more of the material. And this is, excuse me, Japanese green maple. And I like that because it's odd, it's different. And I call this my vase-shaped maple because the branches are wider on the bottom than the top. So it's inverted as far as, you know, typically the canopy is wider on top on a tree. But when I took this air layer, that's what I saw, and that's what I've been going with for these past 7 or 8 years. And I'm liking it. And of course, I just really love the leaves on the Japanese green maples. You know, so many varieties to choose from, so many color pattern variations to see. But again, that was my little bonsai show, since everybody is stuck like Chuck. And we're going to call this a day. Like I said, it's almost an hour that you guys are hanging out with me, and I appreciate that. So, we'll see you. Have a good day, and stay safe.